Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation podcast. Today I have Michele Payn on with me. And guys, I know I say this a lot, but I am extremely excited for this conversation. Michele has been an advocate for agriculture for many years now, and I am just so excited to share her wealth of knowledge with all of you guys. Michele, I'm not going to talk too long about you. I'm just going to let you take it away, share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and all the things.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you. So, I am a farm girl through and through, originally from Michigan. I now live in central Indiana after stops in Wisconsin and California. So, I have seen a lot of different agriculture in this country as well as around the world. Serving international agriculture is a passion of mine that not a lot of people know about. But I am a author. I have 4 books out primarily around connecting farm and food. And then I have also delved into the mental wellness and stress management space and agriculture, as well as science communications for obvious reasons more recently. I also am a professional speaker. That's how I earn my living, actually, is going out and talking a lot. And so I try to help people really understand how to better connect farm and food in a friendly way, as well as why communicating science is necessary today. So, personally, we have registered Holsteins running around our front yard. My daughter and I show cattle. My husband tells everyone that it's women's work on our farm. So if you see me looking off in the distance, sometimes they go running by and it causes me distress when I'm doing these interviews, but hopefully they won't do that today.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Michele. I'm just so excited to dive into our conversation today. Guys, we're going to be talking all things like AI in agriculture and a little bit of the science background that Michele's got in her arsenal of knowledge. But then we're also going to talk about the advocacy side. Like she said, she's written 4 books about just communicating food and agriculture and talking with consumers and things like that. So I'm excited to kind of bounce around all of these different topics. Michele, can you just kind of take it away? Share a little bit about your knowledge of AI in agriculture and where this industry is leading with just the new turn of technology.
Sure. Well, back when I started, I actually worked in the international AI business, and that included breeding clubs and a whole lot of semen. But I would guess that's probably not the AI that you're talking about today. I am not an expert in AI, and anyone who tells you that they are, I would probably question pretty strongly because it is changing every single day. But really, what I've started doing is working with some of my speaking and writing clients to identify what's being said about agriculture in AI. So obviously, the engines are informed on what's out there. If you are in agriculture and you want to be terrified, go to ChatGPT and ask them about a specific issue in agriculture. So I was keynoting for the American Meat Science Association. I think it was this past summer, and I actually had different examples about poultry in there. And AI couldn't discern the difference between egg laying and broilers when I was asking it questions about antibiotic use and so forth. So, my position is very much that we need to be proactive as much as we still can be and get information out there from a firsthand standpoint to really inform the AI tools accurately about what's happening, because otherwise we're going to see it go the same way that social media did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that if we don't get out and share our story, share the facts, someone else is going to do it for us. And sometimes those facts or just knowledge bases aren't accurate. And I think that that just really goes into the topic of advocacy and things like that too. And sharing a little bit more about ourselves and our stories and being proactive in that sense. What are your thoughts on that aspect? How can we, as agriculturalists, really continue to be proactive with these AI engines that are becoming more and more relevant?
Yes, so I think one of the challenges is that nobody really wants to take the risk with AI. I've had so many people who are very good advocates, whichever you want to call them, who say ChatGPT terrifies me. Well, that's fine, but that's probably not proactive. So part of it is not just using the AI tools in college or in high school, but part of it is looking at it from a business standpoint. It's fascinating to me to think about the ways that you can build efficiencies. For example, I've been doing quite a bit of strategic planning for Kentucky and Indiana. And one of the things that I have found is that AI actually will transcribe handwritten notes. If you didn't know that, it is a phenomenal tool. And it will also help summarize and help identify common themes. I've never used any of the AI tools to do any of my writing. I have a couple different national columns. I do look to it for ideas. But from an advocacy standpoint, when you step back and you think about what the opportunity is, first off, is to learn about it. The secret to AI, in my opinion, is the preciseness of the prompt and getting that drilled down to something that is actually useful. And then secondly, looking at what's there and trying to publish information that offers the AI tools material in the future. So whether that's publications, whether it's blog posts, a lot of the IT experts have assured me that it's the wild, wild west, and that tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity and others are not necessarily all going to one place to find information. So what we need to do in agriculture is try to get as much information in a public forum as we possibly can.
What are your recommendations for starting to get out into that public forum and really just starting to get it out there so that these systems can start utilizing that information in their knowledge base?
Yeah, so obviously podcasts like this are critical. Social media counts, videos count, written material counts a great deal. I have discovered in writing several books that people are terrified to write, and I'm not quite sure why. But blogs, even though they're old school at this point, blogs absolutely work. And then also professional publications certainly are a great way. The last time that I checked, there is not a particularly stronger place than another. AI is looking for real life experience, so to speak. So the more real life that you can offer, the stronger it would be.
And I genuinely think that that goes a lot into our discussion of just sharing your story and advocating for agriculture. Because as you advocate for agriculture, just to the public, whether that be consumers or other agriculturalists, you're also providing use for these AI systems to go back to. What is your just kind of advice in that sector of like any farmers and ranchers or just young advocates in agriculture that are like, I don't have a story to share. I don't know what to share. There, you just listed off 5 platforms. Which do I choose? Where do I start? Just all of the things like that.
Yeah, and it's funny how this era reminds me of when social media first started, which, believe it or not, wasn't that long ago. So we had a lot of these same conversation, but at the end of the day, through it all, authenticity is what matters the most. And your most authentic story, your best story for agriculture is absolutely your own. And it doesn't matter if you're an 18-year-old FFA member or if you're a 30-year-old young farmer or if you're a 60-year-old crusty old guy farmer. The reality is your story matters. And I did not exclude females from that, by the way, because clearly we are rocking that space. But I think one of the things that we have to understand is that we all have an authentic story. And there will be people out there that tell you there is a certain way to tell a story. I've been doing this for 23 years. I am one of the pioneers in this space, and I can assure you that there is not a single right way to do this, period, end of story. Your authenticity probably matters more than anything else. It matters more than the platform. It matters more than the polish. And it certainly matters more than what the latest trend is. Because if you can share with others on a human level exactly why you're in agriculture and why you care deeply about this business and providing food for others, then that's a win because humans relate to humans. And without going off on too much of a rampage, we have an unfortunate history of leading with data and science in agriculture, and it doesn't work. If that's our response mechanism, we clearly are going to fail because when you look at what the activists and what others are doing, it's an emotional message. And agriculture needs to learn to connect on an emotional level.
How do we do that? Where do we start with connecting on that emotional level?
Yeah, so one of the things that I work with audiences a lot on is understanding exactly who you're talking to. So, Lauren, one of the questions that I had before we got started is who's your audience? Because I know I need to, I need to make sure I'm doing an effective job of resonating where people are. And one of the things that we have to understand is that some of us are more adept at working, for example, on the Hill. Some of us are more adept at going in elementary classrooms. Some are more adept with working with our peers at a high school or collegiate level. It doesn't matter who you are targeting. What matters the most is that you're passionate about doing that. And so for me, one of my target audiences has been dietitians through the years. They actually caused me to write my first book back in 2013 because I did not believe that anybody in agriculture would ever buy a book that I would write. I just did not believe it. And the only thing that got me finally to first base on that is it's a two-sided book. So No More Food Fights is my first book. And it's a two-sided book, and one side targets the food side of the plate, and the other side targets the farming side of the plate. And ironically, what's covered on both sides are very similar. It's about knowing your target audience and their hot button and being able to talk to them. But I approached it very differently because dietitians, you have to talk to differently than you talk to farmers. Likewise, when I'm working with my 4-H members that I've done for 25 years, I also know that I have to connect with them differently. So the first step is really knowing who you can talk with or who you can connect with the most effectively. And the second, and the one that we miss most often in agriculture from my experience, is knowing what excites them. What are their hot buttons? What are their interests? So if you've heard me speak, you probably have heard me mention my alma mater, Michigan State. I'm a very passionate Spartan. I believe everybody should bleed green. So I have to say, go green. But the reason why I talk about the Spartans so much is because in Big Ten country in particular, it's a hot button issue. It's usually not a positive hot button issue for the listener, but it's a positive hot button for me. But it allows us to have this connection. So for example, if you're a Buckeye, A, I'm sorry, but B, you're going to you're going to connect with me because of the Big Ten connection. So the point here is that hot buttons are very human interest. They're not all related to farming. Sure, somebody's hot button may be pesticides, but it may not be a positive hot button. Their hot button is most not likely farmer profitability unless they work this business of ours, right? So being able to understand what excites people, what interests people, where their passions are really, that's really the key to connecting agriculture successfully in my experience.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that that just goes outside of advocating, but just onto a communication level of what goes through your mind when you are just communicating with people or trying to lead a successful conversation. It is, where can we find common ground? If you're having an argument with your spouse, it's, where can we find common ground? It's like that is the basis of just communication in general. And I think that so often, like you said earlier, we try to lead with the facts. We were driven for a really long time, like, just lean on the facts. The facts are right. They're not going to change, yada, yada, yada. And that was great. But we need to understand also that we can use the facts in an emotional stance. We can put emotion, we can start with emotion, we can lead with our heart, but then we can dribble the facts in there. But we don't need to just drill them, because you're not going to get through to anyone just sitting there and listing off a trillion facts.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I would ask all of your listeners, do you like it when people approach you and tell you that you need to be educated? Most of us probably don't. You know, if you were to walk on a farm or ranch and you said, well, hey, I'm here to educate you, and they don't know you from Adam, you're not going to get a positive response. But yet, agriculture stance historically has been, I am farmer, I know all, let me educate you. And it comes off arrogantly. And I'm sure that many of you have never said those words, but yet that has been our position. And this is not about education. It's about having a conversation. It's about highlighting the human beings of agriculture to the humans that are eating our products, and also those that have concerns. We have a tendency to be very defensive in agriculture. So it's trying to figure out how to connect in a more human way would allow us to come off as a whole lot more compassionate, for sure.
It absolutely would. You discussed earlier, just kind of the idea of wherever you're advocating, whether it be in an elementary school room, whether it be with your peers or on Capitol Hill, you have a voice and you have a story to share. Can you share a little bit about how to find that place? Like, how do you know if your calling is to be the person on Capitol Hill, or if your calling is to be the volunteer that goes and reads children's books in the kindergarten room?
Well, sure. And I think that changes a little bit throughout your career. So if you're an 18-year-old FFA member, and I've coached a lot of different FFA members, some are very talented, as you said, at going onto the hill. Others really excel with elementary school classrooms. But honestly, if you're in the early stages of your career, I would say even pre-30, you should probably explore a number of different options. I didn't even know dietitians existed when I started in this business. Really, I certainly hadn't connected with any of them. So you go through different phases. So, for example, when I was at Michigan State, I worked in the reproductive physiology laboratory and the animal science building. I actually gave the final RBST shots and so forth out in the cattle barn, but in the laboratory is where most of our work was housed. And that animal science building was actually tried to be burned down by some animal rights activists, right? And that kind of raised my eyebrows. I was finishing up at Michigan State when that happened. And then when I went out to California and I worked in the international dairy genetics and I saw the incredible diversity of California agriculture and learned about cotton and growing fruits and nuts and vegetables and all those things, it really made me wonder if people understood how crazy our business was as far as the diversity. And I grew up in Michigan, mind you, which is very, very diverse in different products. And then while I was out in California, I heard about how our agriculture hall at Michigan State, they tried to blow up the activists. And that got my attention, I will admit. And obviously, there were a number of things that happened in California too. So at that point, I realized that agriculture had to have a voice. And then I went to work for the National FFA Foundation when the center relocated to Indianapolis and had the opportunity to work with a whole lot of Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. And I started seeing from the inside that information was not being shared. The science of the products that we put on our products was not adequately shared. And through that process, long story short, raising millions of dollars for FFA, I was able to see that I could be very effective with executives. And I really enjoyed working with executives, particularly around sharing the agriculture education story. So for me, that was an easy place to start practicing some of this, if you will. And then once I launched my business way back in 2001 and had the opportunity to work with a wide variety of people, I started looking more towards the food side of the plate. I will always be a farm girl. I will always have a love affair with those skinny black and white, beautiful Holstein cows, which I know all you beef people are scoffing at, but I don't care. I love them. But at the end of the day, I have to take my farm hat off. And when I wrote my second book in particular, Food Truths from Farm to Table, I actually turned in 30,000 more words than what I was supposed to for that book because I wanted so badly to get the right information out. But that was a place where I really learned to understand dietitians and dietetic perspective because I did a bunch of research around that. So that's my very long way of saying your career will change, your interests will change. When I became a mom, I very quickly immediately realized the guilt trip that mothers are put under and the misinformation campaign that targets people around their food is quite frankly pathetic. It terrifies people. So that's a very long answer that it's going to look like this for you, and that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. So you may start out when you're in college wanting to target your peers, and then by the time you get out, you may decide that you want to work in lobbying, and then another 10 years, it may be that you're working with food groups. So it's going to change, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think like the biggest key in what you just said is just getting out there and trying them. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to know what you love. You're not going to know what resonates with you personally or where your strengths or weaknesses are unless you're getting out there and actually trying. And for a lot of people, it does start with your peers. And that's a great place to start because there's a lot less on the line, I guess you could say, if you are starting with your peers and just the discussions that you can have with your peers and different things like that, that you can share your story and be authentic and kind of trial run different things when you're at lower stakes. And so a lot of it is just starting with your peers. And then maybe from there, it's going to social media and sharing about your story there. And then maybe you get asked to go to Capitol Hill and share your story. Like everyone has a different path. And you're quickly going to realize what you do love and what you don't love and things like that. But I think it's also important to just get out there and try. Because like we talked about early on in this podcast episode, that if we're not sharing, someone else is sharing for us, or the information just blatantly isn't getting shared correctly.
Absolutely. And some of my best research has been sitting around kitchen tables with other moms. When I wrote Food Bullying, um, I knew our brains were being manipulated. When I finished the second book, I was ready to go on the third book because I knew our brains were being manipulated. And then I found neuroscience research that proved that. But what I was dumbfounded by, frankly, that I didn't honestly learn until Food Bullying was released, was exactly how much shame there is around food. People with disordered eating. When they started reaching out, I was shocked, honestly. But my best research was sitting around kitchen tables with other moms. And so, sometime, if you can do it, and this requires a very difficult technique of biting your tongue, sometime if you can just sit around, as you said, Lauren, with your peers or with others and just start asking questions. Ask them what they think about hormones in beef cattle. Ask them what they think about antibiotics. Ask them what they think about GMOs. You know, you probably don't lead with GMOs or antibiotics. Go with the softer topics. But the key in this is sitting back and listening, right? It's really hard. I mean, I have virtually no memories in my life without dairy cattle, and it's really hard to listen to people say that dairy farmers are raping cattle. Um, but it is important that we hear that and then we follow up with, well, why do you think that? And where did you get that information? Social media is a great platform as far as getting your story out there, getting your agriculture story out there, and showing your authenticity. Depending on the tool, there certainly can be some more crazies in some of the platforms than others. But if you really want to have some good, solid research, and you can also do it virtually, pull together a Zoom group, start asking questions, and then be quiet and listen.
I think that that is probably one of the biggest and best and also hardest skills to learn as an advocate and as just a communicator in general. And something that I am struggling with and still working on every day is just biting my tongue and just listening to what people have to say without my interruptions or like, oh, but that's not right, or like trying to correct them rather than just sitting there and listening. And like you said, asking those questions of, okay, but where'd you get that information? And like having them actually challenge their own thinking rather than me just sitting there and spewing what I think are facts or what I think are like what I want the end result to be, instead of just skipping ahead, letting those individuals actually sit there and use those critical thinking skills of challenging their own way of thinking. Because if someone is able to sit there and work through it themselves and challenge themselves in their own way of thinking rather than us just sitting there and saying like, no, like here's the end result you need to get to, it provides a longer lasting impact. It provides a sense of like rewiring their brain to
Mm-hmm.
actually question what they're seeing, question what they're hearing, and next time they're presented with an agricultural quote unquote fact, they can sit there and they can utilize that skill whether they're doing it consciously or not. I guarantee you, if you continue to be a person that just sits there and asks questions and challenges ways of thinking, you're going to, in turn, these people are going to be challenging their ways of thinking themselves without you having to do it anymore.
Yeah, for me, the end goal is to create a question mark. If I can get them thinking 3 weeks after they heard me, why? Why am I thinking? Where did that information come from? That's a win. Because let's face it, in today's grocery store, there's over 40,000 products in the US. If you figure 5 claims on each, that's 200,000 plus claims to sort through. If you're like me, you don't set foot in the grocery store, you do it all online, and then you go pick it up because that's the way I manage my stress around food. But no, in all seriousness, we can't possibly refute every single claim. And only 1.5% of the population's on a farm or ranch anyhow. So statistically speaking, if we can at least equip people, as you said, so that they have some critical thinking skills. And when we wrote Science Story Speak, and I say we because Amy Hayes and I co-authored it, and when we wrote that, and we have a standalone training with it, and it basically covers critical thinking is one of the key elements in it. And it was extremely difficult to try to go through and break everything down, because you can look at what all of the studies and the research say, but then to break it down from a farming and a food standpoint is a little more challenging.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. Just like really being able to sit there and break it down in a sense that farmers and ranchers and agriculturalists challenged ourselves to do sometimes. And I love what you said earlier about putting on your consumer hat or putting on your speaker hat and like taking off your agriculturalist hat. That is a term that I picked up a long time ago as well, of like sometimes I need to sit down and I need to put my consumer hat on. I need to sit down and I need to like take a step back, take off my rose colored glasses, put my knowledge down and be like, okay, so if I was coming at this as a person that lived in downtown LA, how would I be viewing this? If I am being flooded on social media with information that raw milk is better than pasteurized milk, then that's what I'm going to think. Like I'm going to believe that because that's what my information is being flooded with, but I don't have anyone out there in my social medias or anything like that as a person that might be in downtown LA flooding my information with the actual side of agriculture or things like that. So it's putting down your producer hat sometimes, which is really hard. It's not an easy task to do, to be like, okay, so I'm going to take off these rose colored glasses. I'm going to try and put myself in a situation where these people that I am discussing or talking about these topics with are at. But I feel like it also opens our eyes a lot to giving people a lot more grace for their viewpoints and for the ways that they view agriculture. Because if there's not a ton of us out there, and the ratio of like the world population or the United States population compared to people that are advocating for agriculture, we've got a big hill to climb.
We do.
But it's still one of those things that we have to do it. And I loved what you said about taking off that hat. Can you talk a little bit more about that, of like leveling yourself with the people that you're talking to and advocating to and just things like that?
Sure. First off, it takes great maturity to be able to do that. And secondly, it's painful. I still am not always successful at it, but I have the good fortune of having a wonderful circle of friends who keep me pretty honest. And I have one friend in particular who likes to send me questions that she hears because she knows it's going to piss me off. But, she's my ear to the ground. And the thing that we have to remember, and especially post COVID, people don't know what they don't know, and they're bombarded with information, misinformation, disinformation. They don't know what they don't know. They're not advocating, for example, for raw milk because they think that pasteurized milk is horrid. They're advocating for misinformation, disinformation that they've been given. Yeah, and on that particular issue, it's very close to my heart. It was a dairy person, obviously, because the pasteurized milk ordinance has been around for eons. And I have the numbers in Food Truths from Farm to Table, which I'm looking for a copy of, and I don't have one close. But it very clearly shows foodborne illnesses dropped dramatically. I mean, once upon a time, milk killed people because it's a substance that carries bacteria, just as many substances are, just as your body carries bacteria. Pasteurization takes care of that. And particularly in a time where we have high path avian influenza, we need to do a really good job of explaining the science behind pasteurization for sure. Taking off your farm hat means that or your agriculture hat, agribusiness hat, whatever your hat may be. For me, it's pink and black and white, right? Everybody's looks different. But taking that off means that you have to be equipped with asking the right questions. So my standard questions, if you were ever hear me talk to someone who is not agriculture friendly, say, would be, why do you feel that way? Where did you get that information? And tell me more, depending on who they were. When I'm talking with moms, it's just hanging out over a glass of wine. But I will ask them, why do you feel like that? What's driving that? And delve a little bit further into it. But the key to it is being brave enough to take the hat off and then actually listening. And believe it or not, the older you get, the easier listening becomes, because you realize that the greatest value in life is learning from others.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's something that I think we overlook sometimes or take for granted the people that are around us that are very knowledgeable, or just the rooms that we're in, that we are in some rooms sometimes with people that just great mentors or great leaders in the industry that you may be in or things like that. And so that is such a great testament to just communicating and everything like that. You brought up the aspect of like knowing the science, but then also we need to know the science, but know how to connect the science with our own personal story. So leading with the heart, but sprinkling in the science. What's kind of your advice for areas like that, of still knowing the facts, but leading with your story and with some emotion too?
Well, so as you're talking to people, being able to ask them questions and understanding where those hot buttons are, what it is that excites them, like we had talked about earlier, and then talking in a way that appeals to those hot buttons. So, for example, if you happen to be a young mom and you're listening to this, the most obvious place for you to relate is about your kids, whatever may whatever may be happening, pregnancy, trying to feed them baby food, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to approach it from that standpoint, because that's where you build trust. And by the way, for all the cynics out there, farming and ranching is still one of the most highly respected occupations in this country. So don't tell me that you don't have people's respect. There's a lot of squeaky wheels out there, but the American public still trusts us. So if you're connecting with people, in this case, the young mom, if you're connecting with them on something that matters to both of you, the trust is starting to be built, right? That trust can then lead to your story. So as a mom, I typically will relate to my daughter, or through my daughter's activities and whatnot, and connect with other moms. And part of our story is again, Holstein. So we'll talk about what's happening with our different cattle. For example, the other day, one of our heifers was ultrasounded, and she's carrying a heifer. So we're super excited about it. That's the type of quick story that will raise eyebrows, because people would be amazed to hear that we ultrasound cattle, right? They don't know that. And again, they don't know what they don't know. And we have a tendency to think that people are attacking us, but they don't know what they don't know. And they're not going to know if we don't talk to them about it. And so that conversation can lead to, oh, we're having little heifer Jet's going to calve next summer. We're very excited about that. She was ultrasounded. So question number one, what? You ultrasound them? Well, yeah, because we AI them too. Well, isn't that really awful? And I literally will usually try to bring something or bring some fun perspective to that. And so my response to other women as well, would you like a 2,000-pound bull jumping on your back? Because I certainly wouldn't. There's a legitimate reason why we AI. And by the way, genomics are involved in that too, and so forth. So trying to connect it to where they are, connecting my story to where they are, so you can get them to the point where you can talk about, for example, genomics, high science, but yet more than 2/3 of the United States population doesn't know that their food has DNA in it. I'll let that sink in. Over 2/3 of the population doesn't think that their food has DNA in it. And if we think we can explain genetic engineering, genomics, biotechnology, and the like with that as a backdrop, we have a challenge. So you have to go where they are. I mean, most people don't know, for example, that nearly all reproductive research has been done in bovines for humans. And fertility treatments are developed because of bovine research. And so, again, talking to people where they are, in this case, the young mom scenario. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but typically what I will do is to lead with questions, identify their hot buttons, connect my story to their hot buttons, and then eventually get to the science. And here's the deal that we have to realize: people don't remember the science, they remember how you make them feel. And so, as another example, when I work with dietitians, when I speak for dietetic audiences, I make it very clear, in Food Truths from Farm to Table, especially, but when I speak, what my position is on GMOs. And I am very supportive of all technology use in agriculture that is scientifically proven, including vaccines, by the way, but that's a whole different bandwagon. But on GMOs with dietitians, usually I'd say about a third of the room will line up to tell me why GMOs are wrong. And all I say when I talk to them is, I understand your perspective, but let me ask you this. Do you have anyone in your life who's diabetic? And most of us do. My daughter's godfather happens to be severely diabetic. And they'll say yes. I said, well, you might want to talk to that person about GMOs because all insulin is derived from genetically modified bacteria. I didn't talk about farming. I didn't refute their opinion. I simply pointed to the science in a very relatable way. That creates a question mark that takes it away from such an emotional level, because that happens to be a very contentious topic, right? Takes it away from an emotional level and it creates that question mark.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that like almost gave me chills on just how like the delivery of that and just everything is it can be impactful no matter who you're talking to.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
all in how you deliver it and how you choose to present it and just like showing that you have heart and passion behind it like you talked about earlier, I think is one of the most impactful things because like you said, people aren't going to remember the science, they're going to remember how you made them feel. And if they can remember from a conversation that I am extremely passionate about agriculture and that I'm going to deliver my message or the message of ag in a really loving and graceful way, then I did my due. Like that is all I hope to leave conversations with is that Lauren is passionate and she gave us grace. And that if I can leave with that, then I am happy. And I challenge everyone listening to what do you want to leave people with? Like what is that thing that you want to leave them with? And how can you start to present these conversations that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a challenge sometimes to show grace. And I think, particularly with the lack of acceptance around science today. And I'll be honest, back when I was competing and prepared public speaking in FFA, I thought that the essence of the message was in the eloquence of the way I delivered it. And the truth is that humans relate to humans and humans relate to your flaws and inadequacies. So can I talk about GMOs from a diabetic standpoint very easily? Yeah, because I've done it 100 times. I guess my point is you don't have to be eloquent. You do need to be authentic and being able to not only show people that you're passionate about agriculture, but that you care about them. There's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Lack of concern for others today. It's pretty sad, frankly.
Yeah. It absolutely is. I would love to go into just the topic of just misinformation out there, the food, your book that you wrote about just like how scared and the marketing tactics and everything that is surrounding animal agriculture and how that relates to our advocacy, but then also how it relates to what we were talking about when we first started in the discussion of AI and just everything around that.
Sure. So misinformation and disinformation are actually two different problems. So disinformation is the willful intent of spreading misinformation, disinformation. Misinformation is it's not willful; it just happens by accident, right? So I am not the expert on this. I actually have a dear friend who's a social scientist who works for Bayer Canada now. She used to be right there in St. Louis. And then a dietitian, Connie Diekman, who is the former, I believe she was the president of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They got together, they published a paper. This is a great example of a paper that can inform the AI engines of real-time information, authentic information, because it is a published, peer-reviewed article. They were on the Food Bullying podcast, so quick plug for that. And they also, the paper is featured in Science Story Speak. I'm just trying to think. I actually do have a copy right over here of that. So when you consider misinformation and disinformation, don't make the same mistakes that have been made in the past. And at the risk of insulting people who have been around the block a few times, when you look at the way, for example, that GMOs were handled when they were first released in the States, the benefits, all touted benefits to farmers. Perhaps not the best strategy for having consumer approval. And then you allowed the activists to come up with genetically modified organisms, which we all use instead of biotechnology or bioengineering, myself included, right? Because that's the common knowledge. So being thoughtful enough of the big picture, and this is outside of animal agriculture, this is for all of agriculture, but being thoughtful enough about the big picture to consider where the misinformation and disinformation is going to come in. And then in turn, acting about that to get the correct information out there to AI and whatnot. So another example, RBST, I mentioned I had worked on the trial of that. I'm intimately familiar with the science behind it. There's nothing wrong with RBST as long as the cows are managed correctly that are on it. But here's the deal. People's reference point started with a grocery store that decided to put on their milk that it was not treated with hormones. Actually, I think it was hormone free. Don't quote me on that. But clearly misinformation, perhaps not disinformation. Who knows? I wasn't there. I can't say that. But look what that turned into. So we went from a management tool, a dairy management tool that was turned into a scapegoat for consumers about hormones. So people's reference point on hormones, if you are not aware, are female and male reproductive hormone replacement hormones in humans, as well as steroid use in athletes. So you think about someone who's never milked a cow before, who is completely unfamiliar with hormones' real functions and the fact that we all have them and that they're required by life. Hormones are scary. Hormones are freaky. Hormones are freaky associated with baseball players that have done illegal things. Hormones are what is needed when you have a reproductive issue. Hormones are needed for various things. Hormones are bad, right? You're following me here? So you have grocery store that's decided to do niche marketing with misinformation, disinformation. You have a management tool that's misunderstood by the consumers. And at the end of the day, the tool goes away because it's no longer accepted by consumers. And here's the deal, folks. All milk has hormones in it, always has, always will. If you really want an interesting study, look at the hormones in human milk as compared to cow's milk, because human milk is insanely high in their hormone levels. And all milk has BST in it. The difference is that recombinant BST is what's given, it's what's injected, but there's no discernible difference in milk whatsoever. You can't find RBST in milk because it doesn't make it through the system. But again, at the end of the day, the science doesn't matter because we did not do a good job of getting ahead of the misinformation and disinformation. We weren't proactive. And in agriculture, we rarely act until we're really mad. And at that point, we're being reactive and playing defense.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit on being proactive in those senses of you are so right. We wait until it's almost too late sometimes to start speaking about topics or start sharing. And I think that that is a turn that we are taking right now is that as new things are coming out, we are being much better as agriculturalists, at least what I've seen from having my agriculture hat on the side of agriculture and as a person interested in the science and new things coming out. I feel like we're being better about sharing as things come out and being better about sharing to consumers and how we're sharing it. But can you talk a little bit more about being proactive in those aspects, just on the misinformation and disinformation, on new technologies that are coming out? How can we share? What should we be sharing? All of those things.
Sure. Yes, we are being better, I would agree. And yes, I think big picture, perhaps we're thinking about the future more. I still see a lot of ego driven type of behavior. And I would encourage every listener to think about the benefit, not just to your own operation, your own career, but to the big picture of agriculture. So let's go out there, way out there, and let's talk about drones as an example. Not exactly a revolutionary new tool in agriculture at this point, right? But huge opportunity as far as cover crops, pesticide application, whatnot. I actually just had a drone guy on the Food Bullying podcast, and it's fascinating to hear some of the spot treatment things that they can do from a sustainability standpoint. If you're using drones, have you explained to your neighbors why and how? Because I can guarantee you the first thing they're worried about is that you're flying over their house taking pictures. And that may soon be trumped by whatever activity has been going on in the Northeast. I know that there's been some concerns. I've not paid attention to the details because it seems overly sensationalized. But are we truly talking about the application and why we do what we do? I mean, there are very solid reasons to be using drones, but if people are terrified of them, it doesn't make any sense. Likewise, there's very solid reasons to be dehorning cattle. And I know many of you probably have polled cattle. That's great. We don't. And many in cattle in the dairy business still are not polled to this day. But there is a reason why we dehorn cattle, just as there is a reason why we trim tails on pigs, and it's for their protection, right? And so often I hear people want to lead with, well, we dehorn, of course we do, because they'd hurt each other. Well, they probably would hurt you too. So maybe you should start with the human side that other people can relate to, and then go to the point that they can hurt each other. People who have never worked hogs before don't know that they're carnivorous, nasty creatures who truly do bite each other in the butt when they're walking down the alleyway, right? So sometimes we have to explain the why behind what we do and to look down the pike. So when I think about sitting around kitchen tables with other moms or hanging out with my girlfriends and having wine and whatever, I think about trying to listen to their concerns. To me, the ear on the ground is the best forecast for what we need to talk about. Because if you listen closely, and this has been true back in the day when Twitter was awesome, and you can see this on Instagram too, you can see the trends that are coming very clearly. So sometimes just being willing to step back, you don't have to agree with the trend. You may think it's the stupidest thing ever. But if you can really affect change around that by providing stories, pictures, videos, photos, conversations to help people understand that particular technology, that's a proactive win.
It absolutely is. And I think that, again, what you just said goes back to a little bit of the artificial intelligence. And we need to ask ourselves as well, where are people getting their information? Are they getting it from social media? Are they going to ChatGPT and asking it a question? Are they Googling it? Where are they getting this information? And I challenge everyone to go to ChatGPT and ask it an agricultural question and ask it to cite its sources. So ask it a pretty in-depth question and say, cite your sources and cite them in detail with links, all of this stuff. And then go and follow those links and see what articles is it pulling? Where is it pulling this information from? Like all of these things, because we as producers sometimes and as advocates need to be asking ourselves, where are they getting this information? And if they are getting it from something like an AI platform that, gosh, and by the year 2030, they're saying the things that we're going to be able to do with AI are insane and also terrifying at the same time. But it is one of those things that is an area that I think every individual listening to this can be proactive in, is just learning the tools and how these consumers are using them. And AI is a perfect example of that. Of, okay, are people going here and asking them questions? And if they are, Google uses AI now. Like if you Google a question, it now has like the AI summary report with the articles that it's referencing for it. And so think like that just happened in the past 6 months. Think what's going to happen in the next 5 years. And so I think it's one of those things that we can't be scared of it, and we can't be scared of where people are getting their information from. In turn, we need to be the people that are also utilizing it and embracing it and being the people that are like, nope, we're going to get out there. We're going to write blog posts. We're going to post on social media. We're going to have conversations with friends. We're going to do news interviews. You don't have to be the person that is writing the blog post. You can be the person that is being interviewed for the blog post or something like that too. Like it can look different for every individual, but I think that a big part of advocacy is we have to stop being scared about what the other side's saying, and we have to stop being scared about the backlash that we could potentially get from it.
Yeah. And I don't have the statistics, but right here is where people are finding their information. I use Siri ad nauseum, frankly, and have for eons now. But a huge difference if you look at your results from Siri or whatever you use on droids and whatnot, it comes up, and AI is the first response. And it very clearly is labeled what it is. But I also would urge you to make sure you're employing critical thinking skills. So when I think back to the hurricanes that devastated the East Coast this year, many of you probably saw the picture of the cattle in the riverbed being led by a dog. And that was shared over and over and over. That, in fact, was not from this hurricane whatsoever. So were you guilty of sharing something that perhaps, and there was actually one that I got caught on myself that was AI generated. There was an image that was AI generated. Oh, I know. This one really made me mad because I knew the farmer involved, and it was the Benoskis down in Georgia, a dairy farmer, and they talked about the risk and the reward, and it was a very heartfelt piece. And the photo that they shared it with, I was like, well, that's kind of an odd photo, but okay. And to be clear, they did not share it. I found it on Facebook, and then I reshared it, and it was shared all over the place and whatnot. It was a viral type of post. She reached out to me and she said, that's our post. They took my father's photo off of it. So a friend who I know, I've been on their farm in Georgia because my daughter goes to the University of Georgia. She reached out to me and she said, that's our post. This woman has AI generated images. They lifted our copy and put it on her post. And I didn't know that. So we can all be caught. So I think exercising critical thinking ourselves is pretty important for sure.
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that we've been talking about as the discussion of AI is getting bigger and people are losing those critical thinking skills because AI is writing for them or doing XYZ and we're not spending the time. It's a great tool, but we do need to still find ways to utilize those critical thinking skills and really just challenge yourself every day to, like, whether you're scrolling through social media or maybe you're listening to the news or maybe it's just you're out on a walk and like just utilize critical thinking skills in whatever way you can so that we're continuing to stretch that muscle because it is a muscle that needs stretch. It is a skill that needs to continue to be developed. And I think that's a big thing about being proactive is continuing to encourage that critical thinking in individuals as well. Like we were talking about earlier of you don't have to be the person that's providing them the answer. Maybe it's just you're the person that's asking the right questions that then in turn they're able to use later on.
Absolutely. And, that also includes getting information from different sources. I don't
Yes.
think we do a really good job of that in agriculture, and I'm not going to discuss politics. But I very strongly believe in getting information from a variety of sources. Personally, I don't watch the news. I haven't for eons now. I don't go onto online news sites because I can't handle the negativity and the sensationalism. It's just a boundary I had to put in place. But when I do choose to go source information, I make sure that I get it from a variety of places because journalism is certainly not what it used to be. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, it absolutely is. But I think that that is such a key component that you just discussed of going to multiple sources because that also is a thing that I feel like we have lost, whether it is a hot news topic or whether it is scientific research. Go back to your eighth grade year in school and you started writing research papers. What did our teachers make us do? They made us cite three different sources. And I know my teachers even made us cite a digital source and a written source and a verbal source. Like, and just going back to kind of some of that foundational knowledge that was instilled in us a long time ago about just utilizing sources and where to find them and how to find a peer reviewed source and things like that, that are going to just provide better context. And I think that that goes into just the emotional side too of including yourself in conversations that might be uncomfortable, with people on the other side, people that advocate against agriculture. Have you ever sat down and had a conversation with someone? Sometimes it's hard to find someone that's willing to have a conversation with you that's not going to get heated and you can talk like adults. So sometimes that's hard, but it's a good challenge too to just sit down and be like, okay, so what are these people thinking? Where is this coming from? Where's their mind going on these things? And just all the different topics like that.
I think it's critical and gets back to those listening skills that we talked about too.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I have so enjoyed everything that we've talked about today. I just looked down and can't believe that we're almost at an hour. Michele, I would love to start rounding out the podcast and ask you what your one piece of advice is, or multiple pieces of advice are, that you would like to leave the next generation of agriculture with.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I mean, I've worked with lots of young people, and I would say the advice varies depending on who I'm talking to. But at the end of the day, to serve our business well. Obviously, you have to take care of yourself first, and obviously, you have to follow your passions and all of that good stuff. But I would really love to see more people that serve our business well. Agriculture is an incredible community, and sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We're not real successful at working together, frankly, and I can say that especially as an independent dairy person. So the challenge is to think about the big picture and how you can serve that. Because if you serve your business well, it will take care of you for sure. And as you serve your business well, you serve others. At the end of the day, this work is not about yourself, in my opinion. It's about those that you can impact. And so, really, the goal of my work has always been to impact as many people as possible to be able to connect farm and food.
Absolutely. I couldn't have figured out a better way to round out everything that we talked about today other than that statement right there. So, thank you so, so much, Michele, for your time today. I appreciate your wealth of knowledge. And I know that I got so much motivation and knowledge and insight from this podcast. And I'm sure that our listeners did as well. And to all of you listeners out there, I will have all of Michele's links linked down in the show notes. So, make sure you go check those out, go follow along on her journey, and just get some more insight from her there. And we will see y'all next week on another episode of the Next Generation Podcast. We'll see ya.